Welcome back to The Explainer. So today, we're exploring a seriously fascinating framework that totally flips the modern health narrative on its head. I mean, we're constantly bombarded, right? The wellness industry is always telling us we need to buy the newest supplement, the latest superfood, or some pricey meal plan to finally fix our bodies. But what if achieving true metabolic health and managing your glucose cost absolutely $0? Today, we're looking at this amazing, historical, ancient blueprint for biological autonomy. We're going to see exactly how ancient scriptural foundations map perfectly onto modern metabolic health, and how the industrial food system literally derailed our biology.
Okay, let's dive into this provocative hook. The core argument here is that true metabolic health, real glucose management, requires zero financial cost. Just think about that for a second. We're so conditioned to think of health as an addition, something we have to go out and acquire or purchase. But this framework suggests that reversing metabolic strain and chronic damage is actually achieved by subtraction. It's about ceasing the ingestion of modern toxins and putting a stop to overeating, rather than just buying another cure. It's a deeply empowering concept, really, because it puts the control entirely back into your hands.
To understand how we get back to baseline, we have to look at the wild contrast between our original, historical dietary blueprint and our current reality. In the Genesis narrative of Eden, the human body was perfectly matched to a diet that required zero external processing. Food was gathered in its whole living state. Fast forward to the modern era, and wow, we have a massive disconnect. Today's diet is overwhelmingly made up of chemically modified, hyperpalatable industrial commodities. These aren't just foods that have been tweaked, they are, frankly, synthetic fabrications. We've shifted from living foods to engineered commodities, and our biology is absolutely paying the price.
Now, what's really fascinating is how this text views the scriptural timeline as a historical record of human dietary evolution. Following the exile from Eden, human survival suddenly required heavy physical output. Think of Cain tilling the soil and Abel managing livestock. Then, in the post-flood era of Noah, the human diet was structurally expanded to include animal proteins just to survive a much harsher global climate. But even then, the food remained entirely whole and unrefined. Later on, the Mosaic laws found in Leviticus introduced strict dietary boundaries. Remember, this was before the luxury of modern refrigeration, so restricting things like scavenging animals and bottom feeders provided incredibly practical protection against toxic bacterial pathogens. It was all about communal health and sheer survival.
And that brings us to what's called the Jesus transposition. In the New Testament, Jesus radically discarded those hyper-fixated ritualistic washing ceremonies. He basically declared that biological and spiritual damage stems not from whole foods entering the stomach, but from corrupt behavior and greed coming from the heart. But, and here is the really critical caveat the text emphasizes, the everything that was available to eat in first-century Judea consisted exclusively of stone-ground ancient grains, wild fish, raw olives, and clean water. So while this liberated people from ritual restrictions, it absolutely cannot be used as a free pass to justify eating modern ultra-processed formulations. The food Jesus declared clean was entirely natural.
Section 1. The Industrial Food Shift, from Fields to Factories.
This era marks what we might call the fall, which is the permanent decoupling of human nutrition from natural ecology. For millennia, food naturally spoiled, which practically put a structural limit on overconsumption. But let's walk through this timeline to see exactly how mass processing completely shattered that boundary. In the late 1800s, rapid urban migration meant food had to travel massive distances without refrigeration, leading early manufacturers to pack food with literally lethal preservatives, like formaldehyde. Crazy, right? This led to Henry J. Heinz pioneering a purity movement with his shelf-stable, unadulterated ketchup in clear glass bottles. But as we move into the 1900s, the focus shifted from simple preservation to aggressive commercialization and the mass introduction of sugar, setting the stage for global metabolic decline.
You are going to love this corporate origin story. It all starts with John Harvey Kellogg at the Battle Creek Sanitarium. He originally developed cornflakes as an explicitly bland, unrefined, whole-grain therapeutic food. The whole point of the cereal was to combat gluttony and promote physical temperance. But his brother, Will Keith Kellogg, realized that bland grains just wouldn't make them rich, so he split from the sanitarium's mission and pumped those flakes full of massive loads of refined white sugar to secure explosive commercial growth. Competitors like C.W. Post quickly copied this model, permanently shifting the global human breakfast archetype from whole proteins to a mandatory industrial morning glucose spike.
And this next part brilliantly illustrates the industrial shift into the modern era. In 1937, the U.S. military worked with Hershey to engineer Ration D, which was a heat-resistant emergency survival bar.
The military's specific instruction was that it must taste, and I quote, slightly better than a boiled potato. Why? To deliberately prevent soldiers from eating it recreationally. But here's the kicker. After World War II, Hershey took those massive, state-subsidized factories and repurposed them for the domestic market. They aggressively marketed cheap, highly palatable, high-sugar commodities directly to civilian children. The food supply was, quite literally, weaponized for profit. So after understanding that massive industrial subversion of our food supply, we can finally look at our restorative framework. Reversing insulin resistance, reducing advanced glycation end products, and mitigating risks like metabolic dementia require us to bridge that historical knowledge into practical, everyday steps. And the best part? It relies entirely on cost-free, self-contained biological principles. Here they are, the 5 pillars of recovery. 1. Cease ingesting industrial toxins. 2. Eradicate gluttony through portion control. 3. Drink clean electrolyte-rich water. 4. Walk extensively. And 5. Embed intermittent fasting. As we break these down, I really want you to notice that this isn't some complex, restrictive diet plan that requires a monthly subscription. This is an empowering path of biological autonomy achieved almost entirely through subtraction and natural alignment.
The first pillar frames biological stewardship through this really powerful concept from 1 Corinthians. Human physiology is just deeply disrupted by ultra-processed foods, seed oils, refined sugars, and heavy carbohydrate combinations like flour and sugar. Treating the body as an intentional vessel means taking this foundational step, completely ceasing the intake of these modern industrial toxins. Because honestly, you just cannot outwork or outmedicate a diet built on synthetic fabrications.
Now, the crucial point regarding the second pillar is that modern diseases of abundance represent structural overconsumption. Proverbs warns against gorging, and this framework ties this beautifully to historical models like the feeding of the multitude or the Last Supper. These historical models emphasize shared, communal platters rather than the massive, highly individualized portions we just naturally expect today. To eradicate gluttony, we literally have to restore natural boundary limits on the quantities we consume.
Pillars 4 and 5 combine to form sort of the ultimate physical disciplines. The human body is biomechanically designed for continuous, low-intensity movement. Jesus and his disciples operated within a framework of rigorous pastoral journeys, walking miles and miles daily. This natural baseline activity optimizes glucose clearance without putting the body under systemic stress. Combine that extensive walking with routine intermittent fasting, which the scriptural timeline just treats as a normal rhythm of life, by the way, and you force your body to clear stored liver glycogen, and that naturally drops your baseline insulin levels.
All right, Section 2, the metabolic reality, meal dispersal and dilution.
This brings us to a fascinating historical practice, the ancient habit of diluting clean, zero-sugar alcohol, like a dry red wine, with water during meals. Let's look at the biology at play here, because it's pretty cool. When you consume a clean, diluted, zero-sugar alcoholic beverage with your meal, it actually temporarily downregulates your liver's glucose output, a process called gluconeogenesis. Now, let's be super clear here. Alcohol does not cure structural insulin resistance. However, when it's integrated with strict portion control and a total absence of ultra-processed sugars, this ancient practice serves as a smooth, non-spiking addition to your meal. It completely avoids the massive glucose and insulin surges that are typically triggered by drinking commercial beers or modern sugary cocktails.
Ultimately, all the historical blueprints and biological science in the world won't help us until we confront our own environment. The most critical step toward metabolic freedom isn't buying a new product. It is honestly acknowledging our deep neurological addiction to industrial sugar and carbohydrates. Once you really see the history of how our biology was hijacked by industrial mass processing, you finally have the power to step off that conveyor belt. So, are you ready to reclaim your metabolic autonomy through the simple, powerful act of subtraction? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this leaves you feeling empowered to rethink your daily disciplines. See you next time!